Through the last year, a few friends of mine have found out that I'm doing this channel, and they just get the biggest kick out of it. It's funny. I mean, it's just funny that they look at me and they're like, "You're doing that?" And sometimes I look at me and I say, "I'm doing that?" But yeah, I'm really doing it because I love these stories. Well, when friends find out you're interested in Bigfoot and other strange encounter stories, sometimes they'll come up and they'll say, "I got a story for you." So I met a buddy of mine that I used to hunt with years ago over in Memphis back in October and November, and he told me this story, and I recorded him telling the story on my phone. And he goes, "Why don't you just write it? I'll tell you the whole thing. You just write it out and put it on your show." He's been after me, along with another person, a good friend of mine, to get their stories written, and I finally got his done, and I'm going to move on to this other one. But this is a great story. It's a great story, and I know exactly what he's talking about and everything he says because I've been to these places. I know exactly where he's talking about. That's what makes it so interesting to me. So let me quit running my mouth and let's get on with the video. All right, here we go. This is a Bigfoot encounter, but it will take me a few paragraphs to get there. This whole thing is a good story, and you need to know how all this happened. Every 3 to 5 years, a freak thing would happen to me when I was duck hunting. It may happen to some duck hunters every year, but for me, it was a rare event. I will try to explain to those who have never hunted waterfowl what a normal hunt looks like without boring you with the trivial details. Once you're all set up in a concealed location with your decoys floating in front of you, it's a waiting game. Waterfowling is a passive sport. You wait for the ducks to fly over and you hope your spread catches their eye and that the quick little birds are tired or hungry. And if they are, they will circle your spread several times and decide whether your group of fake plastic decoys looks more inviting than the group of real ducks that they just passed 5 miles back. If they like it, they will begin their ever-descending approach, circling your decoys. As they lose altitude, your spread needs to look even more appealing so that they will commit. Tie a jerk string on a couple of decoys or kick the water if you're standing in it. Mallards love movement on the water. Once they commit, they will make one final pass to assure themselves there is no danger, or they will simply engage the air brakes and drop from the sky, plopping into your decoys like a rock. If you can get one or more to land in the decoys, it is best not to shoot those because the ducks that have not yet committed will see that the area is safe and the whole flight will eventually fall into your spread, giving you, the hunter, better odds of killing a few. All of what I have just written has variables. Some days are miserable, cold, wet, freezing rain, where you will work your tail off and never see a duck. On most occasions, especially after the first week of the season, the little fighter jets will circle your spread just out of shotgun range for several minutes, creating great anticipation for the hunter, only to be disappointed when they flare off, either spooked by something they see or because the real ducks floating 300 yards ahead look more inviting than your discount decoys from Max Outfitters. In my, or should I say our case, there are 4 of us who grew up hunting these birds, and the addiction continues today. We rarely got skunked. And even though I consider the sport an addiction, I can't go as much as I used to. There was always some shooting, even if it was sky busting. Sky busting is a term to demean duck hunters for shooting at ducks too far away because you're not skilled enough to bring the birds in close. But we've all done it. The first mallard my dog ever retrieved was sky busted. He fell over 300 yards from my location in some thick timber, but the dog found him, which was a good thing because I would have never found that greenhead. There have been few days in my life that I did not come home with at least something in the bag, but I have been skunked many times. In 1978, I was 18 years old, and by that time I had been duck hunting for 6 years. I knew what I was doing. We all did, and the four of us trusted each other, and we never hunted with anyone else other than our fathers. We all hunt with other people now, but then it was sort of a brotherhood. Again, I won't bore you with the trivial details of how special our relationship was while chasing ducks around the Mid-South, but we had so much fun in those days that it would build a lifetime of memories. In the years since we had all gotten driver's license and were allowed to hunt on our own, we had hunted everywhere within driving distance of Memphis. From Flower Lake in Mississippi and north to Reelfoot, we thought we had hit every duck hole we could find short of the private clubs. But there were still 3 or 4 places we wanted to try, and it all really depended on where the ducks were. If they were south of us, we would head south to Tunica and the surrounding areas. If they were north, we would do the same thing. We had heard from some guys that the ducks were in the Hatchie Bottoms west of Highway 51 and that they had been there for the last week. The word was out, so we knew everyone and their cousin would be there too. A big freeze had hit in mid-December, but the temperatures had started warming and the ice was breaking up, allowing the ducks more open water in which to feed. In other words, the shallow pools were thawing, and that is where we thought we would have some luck. We chose a small oxbow on the Tennessee side of the river called Cold Creek Chute, more commonly known by locals as Cold Creek. I had fished at Cold Creek for years with my father and my brothers, but I had never hunted the oxbow. Christmas break had just started and we all loaded up, boat in tow, early on the first day of the break, and we headed north out of Memphis. Our fathers didn't like us hunting big open water. Many duck hunters had drowned in the preceding years in various accidents on the big open lakes and rivers, so he suggested that we hunt a smaller and older oxbow close to Cold Creek called Hathaway's Pocket. I knew where it was because we had filled many coolers with brim through the years out of that lake. That morning, we crossed the old steel and wooden bridge over Cold Creek, and a few hundred yards down the gravel road, we turned left onto the muddy road leading to Hathaway's Pocket. We launched the aluminum boat and motored north and across the lake until we were at the north end of the pocket. Decoys were deployed, the boat was dragged into some brush and concealed, and we waited for the sun to come up and the action to begin. Early in the morning, we were buzzed by several teal and wood ducks, but it was too dark to shoot. When we could see, it was obvious we had come to the right place. The sky was filled with mallards. It was an overcast day and rain was probably going to start later, and the ducks were flying low. We were good with duck calls, but our experience was that the less we called, the better our odds were. These ducks had been called at for the last 2 months migrating out of Canada, and they know what a call sounds like, opposed to a real duck. But we did short feeding chatters and slow rolls. The ducks were everywhere, but they were not interested in our spread. By 9 a.m. we had seen thousands of birds, and not one had committed into our decoys. They would pitch in like they wanted it, but at the last minute they would gain elevation and zip above us heading west. We figured out that they were lighting in open water behind us. We didn't know what was behind us other than Cold Creek, which we figured was a mile to the west, but we could hear them. It sounded like the biggest duck reunion you could imagine. All the quacking and carrying on was driving us crazy, and we knew we were not hearing them from Cold Creek. It was too far away. Myself and one of our buddies decided to wade to the bank, which there was really no bank, but it was where the bank would have been had the area not been underwater, and walk back to see if we could find these ducks that were raising so much hell behind us. The other 2 guys stayed in the boat. If they heard us shooting, they said they would join us. Dragging a dozen decoys, our shotguns, and a couple of pockets full of shells, we began wading through the swollen cypress and oaks, fighting thick strands of briars, and headed towards the sound of mallard heaven. It must have been a half a mile, and with every step we took, the sounds of the ducks got louder. I was tired. It's hard work getting through all that trash in the pair of waders and in winter clothes. But soon we could see a patch of open water in front of us. We stopped a few feet into the trees and we just watched. And in front of us were no less than 10,000 mallards, gadwalls, and black ducks. Pintails would have been on that list, but in those days, pintail numbers were so low that they could not be shot. I have never seen so many ducks in one place in my life. My pulse quickened. This was going to be an epic day. That would turn out to be an understatement. For you fellas who are familiar with this area, and I didn't know this at the time, but we were standing in an old chute called Boglin's Bottoms. I've never before or since heard it called that, but that is the name I saw on a map a few years later. There was no need for decoys where we were. The ducks were there. We needed to get as close to the open water as possible before we started shooting. We didn't have a boat, and the water was too deep to fetch any ducks that we killed on the water, but if we shot over them and they all got up and flew straight at us into the wind to gain altitude, we would have a better shot. We would only shoot the birds that would fall into the shallow flooded timber where we now stood. It was perfect. With a gap in the trees above us and a clear line of sight into the water, we cut loose. Immediately the birds got up, all 10,000 of them at one time, and the sky turned dark. They were blotting out the overcast light, and the woods actually got darker. When the low flyers got over us, we started knocking down birds. They were higher than we thought they would be, but still within range. After we had spent our 3 shells each, 2 birds lay in the water not far from us. Both were greenheads. The game limits at the time were slim. You could kill 1 Susie, a female mallard, and you were done. But you could kill 3 greenheads, the male mallards, before you had reached your limit. It was a point system, and when you reached 100, you were done for the day. 1 Susie was 100 points. A greenhead was only 30 points, but your third bird could be a Susie. How would the game officers know which bird was killed last, you might ask? They carried thermometers with them, and they took the body temperatures of the birds if they checked your bag. If you killed a Susie at any time during the hunt, it was best to keep her in your waders to keep her temperature up. Let the greenheads lay in the cold water. We reloaded, and we killed 2 more greenheads. By this time, the ducks were so far above us that we stopped shooting, and we figured the day was over. We didn't have a limit, but we had seen the most spectacular wildlife event of a lifetime, and we started laughing and joking. All those effing ducks, and we killed 4. You can't shoot worth a shit. You can't hit the big side of a barn. Well, then blindfold me. I'll kill those bastards blindfolded. You're full of it. I'm surprised you even know how to load that smoke pole. And the banter and laughter went on. Remember when I started this story? Remember the freak event that I said has happened to me every 5 years or so? It was happening for the first time right now. We looked back into the sky, and those ducks were lighting back into the water right in front of us. The sky had cleared of birds somewhat, and we assumed that they were headed to the next county, but they were coming back. We started shooting again, and we knocked down enough to get our limit, and the ducks just kept coming back. They wanted in that spot, and no amount of shooting was going to send them off. We shot again, not trying to kill any ducks, only to spook them off, and they flooded back again. I was wondering where our buddies were. They had said they would come if we started shooting, but we never saw them. We stood there that morning and tried to run those ducks out of that hole, but they came back time after time after time. Now, what I'm about to write is still as fresh in my memory as if it happened yesterday. I will never forget it. I might deal with dementia or Alzheimer's at some point in my life, but I doubt this memory leaves me. I reached into my dry pocket in the front of my waders and I pulled a cigarette out with my lighter. I lit up and I was talking to my buddy about coming back here the next day. We even talked about killing another limit. We had 2 goofballs in the boat back on the lake who had not popped off a shot. As we had almost decided to start shooting again, I looked across the shallow chute and I saw a man standing in the water inside the trees on the other side. It was only about 40 or 50 yards away. His silhouette was clear, but he was not a big man, just average size, maybe 6 feet tall, about the same height as me. "Are we on posted ground?" I asked. "The hell if I know," was the reply I got. "What is that guy wearing?" I asked. "Quit asking me stupid questions," was the next reply I got. "Look how long his arms are," I said. "Will you shut up? Let's just see what he does." We were young and confident, and we were not worried about much. I wasn't afraid that we were on posted ground, so we stood there, both of us leaning against big cypress trees, a good 10 or 20 yards back into the woods, and we watched. The man didn't have waders on, and he wasn't carrying a shotgun, so I knew he wasn't another hunter. He stood perfectly still. Ducks continued to light into the water, some were even close to the man, and he never moved. He raised his right arm slowly, and I saw a stick or something in his hand, and his long arm came out of the water. And in a flash, he reared his arm back and threw that stick, and like a bullet, the stick flipped through the air just above the water. It skimmed the calm surface 2 or 3 times, and it crashed into a wad of ducks a long way from him. Feathers burst into the air above them as the group of ducks lifted off the water vertically. We were watching the ducks. I don't know why. Maybe we just followed the flight of the stick. But as the ducks climbed for air and altitude, another stick came into our view from the opposite direction, and more feathers burst into the air. Ducks were falling. They weren't crippled. They fell back to the water, stone cold dead. No less than 6 ducks lay on the water as we watched the downy feathers drift slowly to the water around them. I instantly looked back to the man who threw the first stick, but it wasn't a man. I realized that now that he was moving. He was wading over to his kill, and he was taller than 6 feet. I had misjudged his height because he was standing in the water. He was tall and lanky, not thick and beefy as some people report. He was steady on his feet in that water, a lot more steady than I would be. I usually had to walk with a stick in flooded timber and mud to keep my balance. This guy was sure on his feet, but that was all I could make out. The sun was not out, and his image contrasted against the trees only 50 yards away was hard to see. If the sun had been shining, I would have seen everything. He picked up the ducks and headed back to the trees. He turned around and stood there beside a huge oak tree in the water. And that is when I knew that he was looking at us. Soon, another figure joined him. This one was smaller or shorter. It was hard to make out in the shadows of the trees. While all this was happening, ducks kept coming back in that hole. I saw him reach down and snap off a cypress knee like it was a twig. He was setting up for another throw. I could not believe this. By this time, I had forgotten I was even with someone. I looked over at my childhood friend, and he was in the same state as me. His mouth hung open like a zombie. "That thing that walked up behind him has a baby on its back," my buddy said. "You're full of shit," I said. "No, look real close. I bet she'll move in a minute to set back up to chunk that stick." She did move, and she did have something on her back that looked like, I can only assume, was a baby or a toddler. We watched them kill more ducks with their sticks. It was the most insane thing I have ever seen. They retrieved their kill and eventually walked back into the trees, and we couldn't see them anymore. But before he completely vanished, he turned his torso to us and a handful of fat mallards over his head and shook them once quickly as if to say, "I'm a hunter too, and I'm better than you." Do you know how big his hand had to be to carry that many ducks? We gathered our things and we started the difficult walk back to the pocket through all that brush, water, and mud. Upon arrival at the boat, we found two lazy goofballs in the bottom of the boat, all bundled up and asleep. They got tired of waiting on us and they had taken a nap. We loaded the boat and we headed home. Of course we told those guys, and we told everyone we knew what had happened. Some people made fun of us and we just laughed with them, because heck, it was funny. We knew no one would believe us, but we told them anyway. It was the craziest day of my entire life. I will never forget what I saw that day. Two of us went back to Hathaway's Pocket the next day and we waded back to Boglin's. The ducks had moved out. We never fired a shot. It was a bluebird day and the place looked totally different. And no, we didn't see any signs of the creatures that we had seen the day before. I have since moved from the Mid-South and I don't live in the place where the ducks are anymore. So my duck hunting is limited to occasional pay hunts and visits back home every 2 or 3 years. For several years, I would hit Cold Creek or Hathaway's Pocket once a year or so to crappie fish or to brim fish. It's a beautiful place. Now almost all the oxbows that I grew up on in the Mid-South Delta are full of the Asian carp, and the natural game fish are all almost gone. It's a crying shame, really. I wonder if the Bigfoot we saw that day still live there. I don't mind telling where this happened. You'll never go there. I think it's all posted now anyway, but you'd have to be a young, stupid 18-year-old boy to brave that sort of terrain on a wintry day. There are not many of those type of people left in the world.